Hello, today we're going to talk about milestones and benchmarks. In NetPoint, we have start milestones and finish milestones and start benchmarks and finish benchmarks. Let's start with the milestones. You can drop a milestone any place on the canvas and give it a description. So we'll say end phase 1. And now that milestone will float out there. Doesn't have to be attached to anything because of GPM. We're not going to force it to an early date. Typically, the way people would use a start embed or a start milestone is they would link it to the start of an activity. So we'll say phase 2. And so in order to link it, we need to make sure that it's a little bit to the left of the activity start. Because logically, if it's going to be a start, it has to be linked up to the start. And once we link it, then it's going to hop over and attach itself right to the start node of phase 2 there. So as you move phase 2 around, then the milestone will move with it. And you could do the same thing with a finish milestone as well. If you look over at finish, we'll go end phase 2. And then we'll link those two up. If I get my linker, there we go. Now that's going to snap right to the end node, and those will track along. So what is the difference between a milestone and a benchmark? A benchmark acts, if you're familiar with P6, a benchmark acts very much like a doubly constrained milestone. So a benchmark doesn't move regardless of what happens to the objects it's attached to. The other interesting attribute about benchmarks is that they're terminal to float. So let me turn on float here. And you'll see we have 145 days of float between the project completion and the end of phase 2. If I start to move project completion back, you'll see the float recalculating. Let's get that to 100. Okay. And now we're going to drop a finish benchmark onto the canvas. Same rules apply here. If it's a finish, it has to be a little bit past the end. If it's a start, it has to be a little bit before the beginning to link it. And we'll say end phase 2. And then we'll link these two up. So phase 2 is going to link to end of phase 2 benchmark. And once these are linked, you'll notice that our float has changed from 100 to 12. And the reason is because this phase 2 benchmark is going to terminate float. And this can be helpful if you are looking to break float apart within phases of a project. And the same is true on the start milestone. It will be, start benchmark. It will be terminal to float. Start phase 2. So if we were to link these together, you won't see any difference in the float calculation. But when I turn on drift, you'll see that. So let's see here. We've got these linked now. Now drift is basically reverse float. It is the amount of space you can move before impacting the start of the project. And in this case, because we have this phase 2 start benchmark attached to phase 2, it has a 19-day gap. We can confirm that by looking here, 19 days. And so that's where you get the 19 days of drift. If we break that logical connection, then it recalculates to 103 days, which reflects the number of days to the start of the project. So that's a brief overview of benchmarks and milestones. Thank you.